Well, first let me say that a successful regional community probably involves a lot more than economics, but since I'm an economist by background, let me focus my answer on the economics. The short answer would be that I think TPP can be an important and an integral part of a successful regional economic community, but a successful regional economic community requires more than just the TPP. And the reason is because the TPP is a preferential trading agreement, and the region as a whole would probably benefit much more by some more progress under the trade liberalization under the multilateral or WTO framework. If we look at the TPP, I think individual countries can and do gain quite a bit from TPP, but as a group, as a whole, particularly developing countries in the region, they would benefit much more from progress under multilateral liberalization. If you look at the TPP also, another noticeable aspect of it is that it's not just a trade agreement. It involves an agreement on many other aspects besides trade, things like on standards related to labor, environment, intellectual property rights, and dispute settlement. And a lot of those things, a lot of those standards aren't necessarily in the best interest of many countries in the region, and again, especially developing countries. So with the TPP, we seem to have gone from what's normally a trade agreement with some agreement on standards to agreement on standards with some trade thrown in. And again, that's not in the best interests of developing countries. The other thing that's noticeable about the TPP is that a lot of countries in the region will have very limited bargaining power under the TPP. And we can see that in the approach that the United States took in negotiating or arranging the TPP, in that it essentially reached a series of agreements with a bunch of smaller countries in the region before moving on to the larger countries like Japan and offering it a take it or leave it approach. So for those reasons, I think that while TPP, again, can be an important integral part of a successful regional economic community, it needs to be complemented with other stuff. It needs to be complemented with greater progress, again, ideally under the WTO multilateral framework. But if that doesn't work, because a lot of people will say WTO is dead and whatnot, then trying to get more progress under alternative trading arrangements. Things like greater progress under the RCEP or RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And if nothing else, that will help, I think, provide countries with more bargaining power when it comes to negotiating the TPP if they decide to pursue that. Yeah, I think that the topic of the forum is a very timely one, because I think there are important elements, not just of the order in Asia, but I think of the international order, key elements of the international order which are under threat right now. If you look at very broadly, the important driver of so much of the prosperity in the region has been globalization, the freer movement of goods, basically trade, investment, and increasingly of people. Those are the things that have really driven so much of the prosperity in the region. But we see again that a lot of those, that the support for things like that are increasingly under attack. If you look, for example, in the countries that have traditionally been the champion of globalization and the elements of a free market, more liberal trade regime, countries like the UK and the US, you see that even in those countries, the support for globalization is under threat. We see increasingly a more isolationist tide, a less internationally oriented tide. So in the UK, for example, we have the Brexit vote which is coming up, and the polls seem to indicate that there's a sizable group that is in favor of Britain leaving the community, the European community. And in terms of in the United States, we have the rise of Donald Trump as the Republican nominee with all that entails. And the concern that I have is that even if Donald Trump doesn't win the presidential elections, even if the Brexit vote does not pass, the terms of the debate will have changed. There will be much more, I think, attention paid to those voices that are against or opposed to globalization. Those people will be much more vocal, and the policymakers will need to pay more attention to them. And so with all that, I think it's very important that we find new champions for globalization and the ideas associated with free trade and free markets and whatnot that have driven so much of not just the region, but the world's prosperity. And I think Korea is in a very good position to play that role. Why is that? I think Korea is in a fairly unique position of being as good as an example of the value and benefits of globalization as you can probably find anywhere. If you look, for example, at the contrast between the different histories and trajectories of South Korea, Republic of Korea, and North Korea, I think there's no greater testimony to the power of relying on market forces and relying on globalization to increase prosperity for your people. I think researchers, scholars, think tanks have an important role in acting as the conscience, I guess, for the international community in trying to promote and support ideas that might not be popular, but are true. And again, in the context of what we're talking about, when things like globalization, the support for globalization is under threat so much, having think tanks and scholars act as a voice of reason, remind people that these are the things that have really contributed so much to our prosperity. That's important, especially, again, in the current context where there's so much populist rhetoric and desire to reverse a lot of what was achieved under globalization. And I think think tanks can play an important role there. I think the best and most lasting way to achieve peace is for us to make the transition from not just recognizing and tolerating our differences, but also begin to appreciate and really value our differences. And if you look, if we were all the same, if we all produced the same kinds of things, if we all looked and did all the same kinds of things, there would be very little value to trade. And with little trade, there wouldn't be a whole lot of prosperity. Similarly, if we all thought the same way, there would be very little value from exchanging ideas. And if we think, again, that the exchange of goods via trade has contributed so much to our prosperity, think of how much more valuable exchanging ideas has been in terms of promoting prosperity for us. So forums like, I think, the Jeju Forum, which bring very different people, very different people from very different careers, different sectors, from different countries together, helps to facilitate that kind of exchange and help us make that transition from, again, from just knowing that we're different, even tolerating difference, but seeing the value of those differences and learning from them. And on this note, if I may share an anecdote, I first attended the Jeju Forum a few years ago. And I remember that on impulse, I attended a session on using local folklore to promote tourism in Jeju. And something I knew absolutely nothing about. And I think I was the only non-Korean in that room. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It was organized by the local government, and they talked about how the local government, the local university worked together in trying to put together the stories from the region, from local folklore, local history, to try to develop and promote tourism spots and sites in Jeju. And it was something that stuck with me. And because it immediately resonated, because I thought about Thailand, a country where I'm from. Thailand, we are very, very successful at one level in terms of tourism, in terms of attracting numbers of tourists to come to Thailand, in terms of arrivals and whatnot. We're right up there at the top, practically leading countries in the world. But our challenge has been, how do we create more value from tourism? How do we increase the value added associated with tourism? So the ideas that I heard from that session in terms of like using our local history and local folklore and stories and whatnot, which, you know, Thailand, I think, is blessed with a lot of history and stories and whatnot as well. To try to add value to our tourism immediately resonated, and I think is something that we can learn a lot from. So from that session, when I went back to Thailand, and I went and spoke in different you know, sessions and seminars or forum in Thailand, I would tell them the story about what I heard in Jeju, what the local government at the local university were doing in Jeju, as just to share ideas. Now, if you ask me whether some local government or someone has actually gone out and implemented the kind of ideas that I shared with them, the answer is I don't know. But maybe, you know, who knows, in the different seminars and workshops that I went to that I talked about this story, maybe I managed to plant this idea into someone's head, just like the way that I got this idea planted in my head when I came to Jeju. And to me, that's the beauty of the exchange of ideas. You don't know what it's going to lead to, and the ability that we can try to learn from different people in surprising and very different ways. The value to me of coming to Jeju, one is obviously at one level to kind of meet people who are in your area and exchange ideas, and it's always fun, obviously, to talk to like-minded people because you share a common language. But then, like I said, the value is if you only talk to people that think like you don't get very much, right? So the ability to exchange ideas with people in your field, that I value very much. Like, for example, the session that we just had on TPP or Trans-Pacific Partnership. We had one, I was from Thailand, we had another fellow from Japan, another fellow from Korea, and when we talked about it, we saw that, you know, there were some things we agreed on, value of trade, all that kind of stuff, but at the same time we had different perspectives and opinions on it. Very rich, so I learned something from it. But even better, right, that I personally enjoy is often going to a session where I know absolutely nothing about. Okay. So if I go to an economic session, I will tend to kind of learn, you know, little nuances or twists on things on topics I'm generally familiar with. But one thing that I enjoy very much and value very much from coming to Jeju is that given the variety of people that you bring here and the huge diversity of topics, it's a tremendous opportunity to go and just learn something completely different and completely new. And the example I mentioned is that of that folklore session, which again is something I attended on impulse. And similarly this time around, you know, so I like going to sessions where I have very, very little background and hearing what people have to say and learning from that.